Preventive medicine, and how do we put it all together to bring people to a healthier place in life, to be healthier and to be preventative and proactive. That is the key. And how we do that is it has to be very personalized. So we're going to go today briefly in this live here about what we're doing in integrative medicine. How does it approach these underlying causes of aging, and how do we help people? So number one is we don't go by the standard reference range, which is only going to be just for disease. We want to know the optimal numbers for each person, and we want to go more in depth on understanding these underlying pathways that don't allow a person to age well, these chronic diseases that are the number one killer: heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer. And we want to be preventative, we want to be proactive. And how do we do that? Well, number one is not to only look, like I said, about the reference ranges, to look more at optimal numbers. And we know, as an example in one of our reports, some of the optimal numbers are different than the ranges. And if we wait too long, we wait for these numbers to get out of the range, again, that is waiting too long. It's not being proactive, it's not being preventative. And that is the key. There's always a place for urgent care, there's a place for emergency room, but then there's a place, and this is where we come in at integrative medicine, for preventative primary care, to really look at these factors that don't allow a person to age well. And what are some of those factors? Well, number one, we've all been talking about, is gut health. And gut health is so important because the standard medicine, we do cultures, and cultures where, again, we're just looking for disease. When we want to be proactive with gut health, you want to look for specific strains that we know, they're called keystone species. And we can find those now on these very advanced DNA PCR stool testing. We can look for specific species that we know produce very key nutrients. So you see, these bacteria, they're not just important because they help to have a balanced gut, a balanced microbiome. They actually produce metabolites that protect our gut. They heal the lining of our gut. They help produce certain vitamins and nutrients. They also produce certain short chain fatty acids that are beneficial for the healing of our gut. So we want to make sure that we have sufficient amounts of these keystone species, such as Akkermansia, Faecobacterium, Lactobacillus bifidus. Certain Clostridia species make a short chain fatty acid known as butyrate, which has been very, very important for the healing of the gut, also for brain health. There's that gut brain connection, which is so important, and butyrate is part of that. And what makes butyrate? Well, a healthy gut microbiome and certain keystone species that we want to make sure are there. So this advanced stool testing is key now for reaching optimal health and being preventative and proactive. And that is the key. We also want to make sure there's not an overgrowth of these species of bacteria that are inflammatory and have been shown in the research to stimulate our immune system. So we can call them autoimmune stimulating types of bacteria, these bacteria that names such as Klebsiella, Citrobacter. We see these are elevated with people with certain autoimmune conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis. So we're looking on these very advanced stool tests that are using PCR DNA technology to see these species, and we can quantify them to see if they're overgrown. And we also want to make sure there's not an overgrowth of H. pylori, especially with the DNA PCR testing. We can see certain genetic factors that we know are the more virulent kind of H. pylori that can cause more of the damage, and we can be more aggressive with the treatments. We also want to make sure there's not an overgrowth of candida, which is a fungus or a yeast. We want to make sure there's not an overgrowth of parasites, because if we're just using the cultures that we use in standard medicine, we're going to miss a lot of this. We're going to miss because we're looking for only disease or pathology. But what about these chronic parasites, this chronic overgrowth that really isn't causing watery diarrhea or bloody stools, but they're causing an outbreak of a skin condition such as eczema. They're causing these subtle conditions such as brain fog or bloating, or a lack of certain nutrients that we see are constantly deficient, even if we're supplementing. So we want to make sure there's not an overgrowth of these bacteria, parasites, yeast, H. pylori, and we use DNA PCR stool testing. And that is really a major way to reaching optimal levels of health. We also want to make sure, since we're doing the DNA PCR stool testing, to make sure there's not a factors that increase our white blood cells known as eosinophils, because that becomes problematic in conditions such as asthma and food sensitivities. We also want to make sure that there's enough digestive enzymes, because that becomes an issue with digestion of protein and fats. We want to really make sure there's a proper digestion of fats, because that's how we're going to get the fat soluble nutrients such as vitamin A, D, and K. And we also want to make sure there's not this immune reaction to certain proteins that we're eating in foods, such as the protein in wheat and oats and rye and spelt. And those are proteins known as gliadin or gluten. And we want to make sure, and we can do that on a very advanced stool test that's using DNA PCR technology, to make sure there's not these antibodies that we're causing by just simply eating these foods over and over again. Because if there are, we can do something about it. We can be proactive and preventative. So that really is one of the first and major components of being proactive, is gut health. We also want to make sure that we're not just using the standard BMI or the standard, just the scale. We want to make sure that we're doing body composition, the very advanced body composition, which goes over exactly how much fat and how much muscle a person has. You see, the proper body composition has a ratio between muscle and fat. And we also want to make sure that we're not losing muscle when we're losing weight and we're losing strictly fat. That's why it's very important to measure body fat and body muscle. And that is how you know you're improving your body composition. And that is another important factor. We also use a marker on mitochondria health. It's called DNA 8-OHDG, dihydroxyguanine. And that is a test that we use for oxidative stress, mitochondria health. See, mitochondria health is key for our energy, because it takes our food, as you look here, this is the citric acid cycle. It takes our food, our protein, fats, and carbohydrates, and breaks it down into energy using all these coenzymes. And you can use certain very advanced testing to see if there's a lacking of these B vitamins, these cofactors in mitochondrial health, and if there is oxidative damage. And that's key. The next step is methylation. That is key. That looks like something like this. This is methylation, which is a process in the body that helps us with detoxification, DNA recycling, and our neurotransmitters, and our removal of excessive estrogens. So it's very important to get that methylation cycle optimized, and we do that with advanced lab testing and understanding nutrient deficiencies, nutrient insufficiencies, because these enzymes and cofactors sometimes need a certain higher level of nutrients depending on what we're doing with our environmental inputs, whether there's a certain amount of toxins, amount of stress, because those are the neurotransmitters, and amount of oxidative stress, because that's the DNA turnover. So that stresses this methylation. We want to really optimize that for preventative and being proactive. So you see, even articles such as this, modulation of metabolic detoxification pathways using foods and certain food nutrients. So you see, liver detoxification is key, and that's another component of how we're approaching integrative medicine, is improving phase 1, phase 2 liver detoxification, which is taking toxins, whether it's coming from medications, hormones in the environment, plastics, other heavy metal toxins, molds, and taking them through these pathways, phase one, phase two, and phase three. And we need certain B vitamins and nutrients, minerals, polyphenols from plants. And we also need to improve phase two, which is using using certain sulfur-based nutrients, sulfur-based foods to help with that process, cruciferous vegetables as an example. So we really want to improve phase one, phase two, and phase three is actually in the gut. And we do that by testing an enzyme in the gut called beta glucuronidase. That helps us with a liver process called glucuronidation. It's part of phase two, but it's involved very much so with a healthy gut microbiome. So that's actually where the gut and the liver connection comes in. It's real fascinating. And you see, these are examples in integrative medicine, how we can improve a person's optimal health. It's no more guessing what supplements to take, no more just what is a healthy diet, because when we do this very advanced gut testing and very advanced laboratory work, we can now direct a diet with the macros, meaning the percentage of protein, fats, and carbs, because we see if insulin's elevated, we see if there's a lack of the omega-3 fatty acids or the DHA, which is a very important long-chain fatty acid. In other words, that's so important for our cellular membrane integrity. We got to really work on that. And food is really key. Food is number one, how we work in integrative medicine. If we need to, we work up to natural targeted nutrients, polyphenols, and again, it has to be targeted, specific to each person, depending on what we see going on in the gut and a lot of this advanced lab testing. We want to reach optimal numbers in these reference ranges. We also want to be testing for the right things. For example, only looking at cholesterol or blood sugar is not going to really be efficient for metabolic conditions, which are really a number one condition over the years. It takes 10, 20 years for these metabolic conditions to really become a pathology, become a disease. You don't want to wait for that. You want to be proactive. So we see fasting insulin. We want to look at the balance between cortisol, insulin, and blood sugars. We want to look at whether the fats in the body are breaking down to those small, dense, more arthrogenic, more artery clogging types of fats. We want to see if they're under oxidation. We want to see if they're under inflammation, because that's what begins the clogging of the arteries. So we could be very proactive and preventative on the whole heart disease situation, which is the number one killer right now. But it takes years to add up for that. So I hope everyone enjoyed this. You can comment where it's available. We answer all the comments. We answer all the questions. You could look at our website, which is there in our corner, and see if on there you can make an appointment for a 15-minute call and see if how we could help you. We are taking appointments and we are helping people reach optimal levels of health and being preventative, being proactive with their health. So where they're not just going through life guessing, wondering if they're doing the right things in their health journey. And we can really help set a person on that path in the optimal way. So now they know what to look for, how to reach those optimal numbers, how to improve their gut health, what is overgrown, what they need more keystone species of, for example, digestive enzymes, as what I mentioned. So reach out, comment below. We are here to help. Have a healthy and